Good morning, all, and a very warm welcome to our channel RSCP Calicut Virtual. I'm Manush Bakji, the curator and project coordinator of the Regional Science Center Calicut, unit of the National Council of Science Museums, Ministry of Culture, Government of India. We are here today to deliberate on a very serious issue. We know any pandemic begets stigmatization, and we are concerned that bad times bring the worst of humans, the worst in humans. Dirty looks, skewed remarks, deserted restaurants, bullied children, post protests, ouster. This is the reality for many since the outbreak of Corona. Stigmatizing the diseased or the afflicted or using the pandemic to ostracize a community is nothing new to humankind. It has an incredibly long history, from the most recent COVID 19 outbreak to the medieval period's panic over leprosy. In every great pandemic that has affected mankind, ranging from smallpox, tuberculosis, Black Death, Spanish flu, to the more recent HIV/AIDS, the stigmatizing theme has been a true constant. In earlier times, the outbreaks were blamed on the low and the immoral class of people who had to be quarantined and removed as a threat to society. The paradigm has now shifted, and the low and immoral people are identified as outsiders, those on the fringes of society, including foreigners, immigrants, racial minorities, and people of low socioeconomic status. It has now gone a step further, even, and has enveloped even the caregivers and the essential health service providers. No one is spared, from doctors, nurses, airline staff, policemen, and anyone who has traveled abroad in recent months and has risked exposure to the virus is being stigmatized against under the garb of protecting oneself. So much so that people are worried about getting themselves tested for COVID 19 despite falling in the high risk category because they fear stigma and ostracization by friends and neighbors, even if they test negative. Even a normal cough in public has become an invitation for disdainful and fearful glances for those around. When a new virus disease emerges, people rely on pre existing and competing cultural explanations of infectious diseases. Cultural and medical anthropologists have long been interested in identifying cultural interpretations of unfamiliar diseases during epidemics. The anthropology of outbreak is conclusive. Stigma and othering pose serious health hazards during epidemics. The human tendency to divide society into us and others when fear strikes become especially prevalent during infectious disease epidemics and leads people to physically distance themselves from perceived sources of transmission. Will COVID 19 become a syndemic ultimately? How to prevent the society from reeling into self defeating tendency of enemy approach and othering its own people? Anthropologists have many insights to share about cultural transformations in outbreak settings. So today we have one of the most leading anthropologists of the country, Dr. Vinay Kumar Srivastava, as our guest. Dr. Srivastava is the director of the Anthropological Survey of India. He has been a professor of Department of Anthropology, Delhi University. He served as principal of the Hindu College in Delhi and director of the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Institute of Asian Studies in Kolkata. Dr. Srivastava was trained in anthropology and sociology from Delhi University and Delhi School of Economics. He earned his PhD from Cambridge University, authored and edited more than 2 dozens of books, and published about 200 research papers and articles. We are honored to have you with us, sir. You are most welcome to our channel, and we think there can hardly be a better person to talk about this issue. I heartily welcome you to deliberate on the disease stigma, and enemy approach.
Good morning to all of you. Good morning, Bakshi Saab. In fact, I am beholden to you, and I'm indeed grateful to you for providing one of the best summaries of what I would be saying, one of the finest executive summaries. In fact, what I have done is that I will be building around the ideas you have raised, building around the concepts you have brought in. And I will be, in fact, covering a larger ground in order to understand the anatomy of stigma, to understand that how this concept is applicable to a certain other context as well, not just in the context of disease. Disease will provide some kind of a case study. Let me begin with one of the common sociological themes. And I am introducing this because a number of your listeners may not be from the fields of sociology and social anthropology. And therefore, I thought that I would introduce this idea and then build up some of the things which emerge out of it. This theme which runs through sociology and social anthropology, and many people have talked about, is the distinction between what people do consciously, intentionally, knowingly, awareingly, and what emerges from their actions. These are two different things. What people are doing, of which they are aware, what they are doing. And second, what is the emergent aspect, what is entailing, what is coming out from what they have done. Now, this distinction was very well realized in the work of Emile Durkheim, who was one of the founders of modern sociology, and he was a Frenchman and wrote many books. And this was his book on religion, where he made this distinction that what people do consciously and what emerges out of their action. Later on, this idea was developed by a large number of other people, and finally, we arrived at two concepts, and that was in the work of Robert Merton. One is called manifest function, and the other is called latent function. And manifest function is what we do consciously, what we do intentionally, and latent function is what emerges out of it, of which we are not aware, of which we are not conscious. What will be the outcome of this? Now, let me just begin with an example. It is a hypothetical example, but I'm sure many of your listeners will be able to find real life cases. I returned from Perth on 24th of March, and then I am home quarantined for 14 days. Outside my house is pasted a label. The background is white in color, on which everything is written with red, shining red. And on this, my details are entered with blue ink, with black ink. My name, when I arrived, how long will I be quarantined? This label is pasted on my house. Surely it has been done with good intention. It conveys, if you look at the purpose behind it, it conveys two things. First of all, it tells us that you have to be home, you have not to go out, is some kind of a line which has been drawn, and it is for you. It performs what I would call curative function. You'll be able to cure yourself, or you will be cured when you stay in the house and you do not go out. You do not have any relationship with the other. And for the outsiders, those who are my neighbors or those who come from other areas, it is some kind of a protective and preventive strategy. They know that here in this house is a man who unfortunately, or a woman who unfortunately, got the disease COVID-19, and and you have to protect yourself. So kindly do not have any interaction with him or her or this family for some time. However, the provisions are made available, milk and other things are made available. So you do not live a life of deprivation. Things seem to be all right. And if you combine these two aspects, the curative function and the preventive function, things are wonderful. And you know that this has been done with good objective, good intention. The goal is fine, the objective is fine, and it must be promoted. And you have seen these kinds of labels on many houses. I have the picture, and tomorrow these labels will end up in a museum where they will have pandemic artifacts or pandemic objects, these and there. Now, come to what emerges out of it. Now, I am moving on to what I called after Robert Merton the latent function, the hidden aspect. What emerges out of it is that I am bearing a label. The label is there on my house. This label is not there on the houses of other people. Or perhaps, if this becomes what is now called hot spot or hot zone, such labels may be on the houses of my neighbors as well. So we all are labeled. That tomorrow, after 14 days or 21 days or whatever, when I'm out, I come out, I am like any other person, I return to what is called the normal society, or what M.N. Srinivas would call normal ritual status. I return to that. However, my neighbors, those who were not afflicted by this, those who remained normal throughout, they would look at me with streaks of suspicion. I would always be under quote COVID for them. And the relationship of conviviality, the relationships of give and take, of reciprocity, they will all be affected by that. And I won't be surprised that my house for years to come, even after the pandemic has come to an end, my house will be known as the house of the corona. And in case there were many people in my neighborhood who suffered from the illness, okay, the entire lane may be called Corona ki Gali. Huh? This is at the folklore at this level. Now, what is this kind of a labeling? Now, this is something which we have to understand, and there are two things which I am pointing out here. The first thing I am pointing out is that a label is put, and for this label, the term which is popularly used, the term which became very popular after 1963, when Irving Goffman, who was a very prominent sociologist, he wrote a book called Stigma. In fact, I thought that I will show it to your readers. Now, this is the book. Now, please note the subtitle of the book, and I want to tell you that many people do not bother about the subtitles. Yeah? And many of our writers, they do not remember the subtitle. If you read the subtitle, there's the subtitle notes on the management of spoiled identity. Look at the word spoiled identity. The identity has been spoiled. Now, this was the book, a thin book, which is eminently readable and runs into something like 147 pages or so, thin book, and it can be read in one go. This book attended to the concept of stigma, and it was based on a large number of autobiographies of people, and especially one autobiography which is published here, is heartrending. It is of a girl who was born without nose. I didn't know before I read this book. I didn't know that there were people born without nose. And today, when the internet facilities are available, recently I saw the pictures of these people and also the experiences of these people without nose. As she writes such a heart-rending letter to someone, finally ending it, yours desperately. Now, this was such a thing, it just touches your heart that there are people who are different from you. And whether or not the others look at her as a person without nose. The person himself or herself knows that he or she is without nose. So thus is different from others. Now, different not in a positive sense. I'm different from you, huh? But this difference is in positive terms. But this difference is understood in negative terms. That I don't have something which others have, and this will affect my total psyche. It will affect my interactions. It will affect my relations with the people of other gender, with my parent, with the other. And many of us may try to sympathize with such a person. And if there's anything which you disdain the most is sympathy coming from the others. We make a distinction in anthropology and also sociology between sympathy and empathy. Empathy is a different kind of a feeling, and empathy is understood as feeling with the other, and sympathy is feeling for the other. Now, empathy is that you feel. I feel for the time being, I feel that I am without nose. How would I be without nose? So these kinds of autobiographies, these kinds of cases which Goffman collected, and he was able to build up a note on stigma. The term became very popular. Two concepts from this, they were quoted and oft quoted. One was, what is stigma? The definition which he gave is repeated again and again. This definition was that stigma is a dishonored label. It is a dishonored title. And coming to the second question, that about stigma continuing forever. I just told you Corona will come to an end. It is not going to remain for forever, or perhaps tomorrow it may become like any other influenza fever or any common flu, and we would forget this, in the time being. But my street will continue to be named as Corona Wali Gali. My house may be known as the Corona people. Now this will be passed down from one generation to the other. So the second aspect which came from Erving Goffman's work was that stigma lasts. It lasts for several years. It lasts for generation, and the information concerning it is transmitted from one generation to the next generation. It becomes almost an inelectable, inalienable part of the individual's persona. Now these are important things to which I will be addressing. In fact, Bakshi Saab, just few days back, in another webinar I was conducting, I gave the example of people who have been afflicted with leprosy. I hate to call them lepers. This is a pejorative term, and we should avoid it. So people who have been afflicted by leprosy, and you see them, they are being carried in carts, okay, with their fingers which have become stump-like, okay, and you see these people begging, and they are, I read somewhere, most of them who are begging, who have come to the streets, with their begging bowls, on their arms round, as one can say, they are free from the bacteria. You can put it like this: they are bacteriologically free. They're not going to spread any infection. But when we look at them, that these who have suffered from leprosy and their fingers have become stung, their skin has also become very thick, we don't want to look at them. And in case they bring their alms bowl, we toss a coin in the alms bowl without even looking at that. I have observed it because closer to my house is a place called Okhla, where there's a Kusht Nivaran Kendra, and see many of them being there. Therefore, although they are bacteriologically free, even if I have physical contact with them, I'm not going to catch the infection. Nevertheless, they are supposed to be harboring that label, and this label will continue for years and years. This is the power of stigma. Incidentally, at the Anthropological Survey of India, which I am looking after these days, We are working on the communities which are called denotified communities, nomadic and semi-nomadic communities. Denotified communities are those which at one time were called criminal tribes. And after the Criminal Tribes Act was repealed in 1952, these communities came to be known as Vimukt Jati, which means denotified communities. They were denotified from the earlier list. And what we have found in the study of more than 150 communities which we have studied, and in total we are going to study 803 communities which belong to this group. What we have found is the persistence of a stigma in each one of them. People say, whom we interviewed, with whom we lived, they say that they do not indulge in any criminal practices. They have given up whatever crime they used to commit in the past. They have completely given it up. But that image continues, that they are the ones who are child lifters. They steal from the houses. They run away with the thing. They're always indulging in antisocial activities, and they have, in all these studies, they have time and again told us that please do something so that this label which is attached on us, this label may go away. Now, this is something which is a very important thing. And finally, I will come to what we can do with respect to this stigma, what we can do with respect to this. Now, these are very different times. In fact, as I see that COVID 19 is almost the name of the context, I'll put it in the inverted commas, is the name of the society which we are currently facing. It's just not the name of the disease, but it's the Corona times. Right? That someone will speak on, say, history in Corona times, that kind of thing. The entire age is being labeled like that. And one can, if you periodize, one can make a distinction between pre-Corona, Corona, and post-Corona. You can look in these three terms. Presently, we are in the middle stage, the stage of being in Corona. And I can't imagine, and I would like to share this with your listener. We had a seminar on health in Delhi University on 29th of February. And I went to Delhi University to deliver the, the valedictory address. And I remember the hall was full and people were sitting so close. There was no concept of any social distancing, any physical distancing. And if suppose on a desk which can barely accommodate three people, if the fourth person came, the others will squeeze as much as they can so that the other could fit in. Now, when I just compare that scenario with the scenario we have now, totally different, qualitatively different. And I see, and I'm sure you must also be seeing, as everyone in the country would be seeing, the qualitative phenomenal change which has occurred in the last, 2.5 months or so. The way we played Holi this year, whereas we may not be able to play Holi in the same way again. And I sometimes realize that after a long time, we have realized that temples are not important. You can always worship in your own house. Let temples be there. So I'll bring the temple there. And also establish a very amicable relationship between social distancing and worship and temple visits. These kinds of changes which have come, they have transformed, and I'm very fond of this term. It has transformed our narrative. It has transformed our thinking. And in this world where things are interconnected, where one country is connected with the other country, where pandemics are not confined to one country, they go from one to the other in the same way as technology goes, as messages go. In this world of interconnections, uh, we find two things happening at the same time. The first thing which is happening is because of globalization, because of the migration of people, because of the shift of people from one to the other, because of what is sometimes called deterritorialization, that you are not bound to any particular territory. You are a part of a large number of territories, and you move from one territory to the other. People who are homeless, in the sense that they do not have any home and their home is everywhere. That kind of a situation. So this is one aspect, and second is that where we are sealing our borders, where we are putting a stop to international aviation, where we are closing ourselves, where territory is becoming more important. This is an interesting and fascinating period to work on, that how deterritorialization and territorialization is coming together. Many of these workers, many of these working class people, many of these mazdoors who are now going back, if you interview them, for them the work, the term working class has been used. If you ask them, they perhaps when they were in Delhi and they were very easily and very nicely settled, they wouldn't have ever thought of going back to their own villages. On the contrary, they will go to their villages and tell the stories of fascinating living in Delhi. They will go back with the gifts from Delhi. And now the same people are going back. They are yearning to go back. So look at how the relationship between deterritorialization and territorialization has become very important. Now, during this time, as you see that the the pandemic has brought to the fore the cleavages, the schisms, the inequalities which were always there in the society. Now, this is very important, that the inequalities which were there, inequalities of gender, inequalities of community, inequalities of caste, which were always there, and these inequalities were supposed to have been mitigated because of development. We always thought that once this kind of a change will occur, when we will be able to have access to technology, when things will be very different. Perhaps we will have a society in which equality will prevail, in which people would be able to get what they want, where some of the traditional inequalities would be marginalized. Other kinds of new inequalities may come, and they are bound to come because of unequal access to technology. But many of these things will go back, and what you find is just the reversal which is happening. That all these inequalities which are there, they have come to the fore, and this is the time that we must study. I would urge upon everyone, not just the social scientists and those who are from humanities and the arts, but everyone to look at what is happening. In fact, I was advising a group of students to whom I addressed that right now you can't go for a lengthy fieldwork with any community outside. You can't even visit your neighbor. You can't even visit your relative. But certainly you can look at what is happening in your own household. You can look at how people in your household are reacting to this. What kind of experiences they are having, and such corona diaries, as they may be called, or experiencing the pandemic, they would be really very valuable in times to come. Because I think this may be in your age also, in my age also. I have never seen such a time earlier in my life. This is the first time I'm seeing, and I'm realizing the importance of each day which is passing, and seeing how the society is changing, how social structures are changing, how we are struggling with this outbreak, how this alarm which is being sounded everywhere, how we are reacting to this, how newspapers are reacting, how social media are reporting. And this is something which is amazing. I don't know whether such information would be available about the earlier pandemics. For example, about about smallpox or about cholera or about plague or about AIDS for that matter. Such kind of valuable information, and we must take care of this because it is telling us about how the society is being transformed. I began, as I told you, I began with uh, Irving Goffman's work, and I thought that that is the starting point. And I also told you that what Goffman thinks about it, and he gives a large number of examples. Most of the examples he has taken up for discussion are of the physically deformed people, are of mentally ill people who have now been cured, the drug addicts, the prostitutes, and those who are ostracized for the other reasons. And these people are trying to adjust to the precarious circumstances in which they find themselves. I did not find much discussion of how people react to pandemics, how stigma becomes a relevant concept in understanding this. That is not a part of the book, which actually gives some very interesting thoughts about the people and how they are stigmatized. For example, they become tainted, they are discounted, they're regarded as failing, they are regarded as handicapped, and and he traces the origin of stigma, from where it comes and how it continues to survive, and what kinds of things it brings. But I thought, after reading the book afresh, I thought that it needs to be supplemented with the example of a disease. How we have been reacting to disease, and how these kinds of inequalities in the world, the inequalities which were already there, how the thought processes we have cultivated and to which we are subscribing, and the harmful misconceptions, which are going along with this. How these three things, which constitute the substratum. I'll go back to this again. One is the underlying inequality. Inequalities of all type, inequalities of strata, inequalities of age, inequalities of gender, inequalities of region, inequalities of ability and disability, all these kinds of inequality, plus a whole body of what we can call ideological fund, the way we think, and the proper understanding and the improper understanding, information and misinformation about this, how this is actually shaping our attitude. Just a very simple example: you just announce to someone, some of your relative, that you are ill with very high fever. Let's take just an experimental situation. Just ring up your relative and say, I'm having very high fever, and I have incessant cough, and I have a running nose. Tell me, what should I do? That relative would say, oh my God, you have all these things, or I'll get back to you. And they will never get back to you. Immediately, it would seem that the relations have been severed once forever. So, how this kind of a situation which is being created, which has come into existence, how this is conducive to to blossoming, to flourishing of stigma, to the blossoming and flourishing of what is called xenophobia. Xenophobia is that you fear the foreigners, and how it brings to the fore. And I thought I would use this word ethnicism, which is not used so much, which may be some kind of sibling of the term racism. So how this brings all this to the fore, and at the back of your mind there should be examples, which I'm sure you all have. The example of how people from particular parts of the country were being called. I would not repeat it because I don't like that such things should go on. And I think the thinker should derive lessons from that, rather than repeating. They should not be taken as examples. When you find someone being called derogatorily, pejoratively, you call. You remember, I read in Deccan Herald a letter which was written by an MLA from Arunachal Pradesh, drawing the attention of the Honorable Prime Minister to these things which were happening. The boys from a particular part of the country, they were not allowed entry into a shop in Hyderabad. Now just see this kind of a thing. Or a student, is spit. I mean, you spit at the student and say, "Go back because you have brought this." And umpteen examples come from America, where how the Asians were treated. So this kind of ethnicism, this kind of racism, how it comes to the fore. This kind of a thing. So which situations give rise to this? When I looked at Goffman's work, I found that there are three major issues which need to be addressed here. And this is something which I will be taking up here. The first is the the examples which Goffman has given are of fixed statuses, like a person who is physically deformed, that status would remain forever, or a kind of disease which would leave an indelible permanent mark, like in the case of someone who has been afflicted with leprosy. What about the diseases and how stigma operates in the context of disease? As I told you, this is the first thing. The second thing is that what is stigma? Is stigma the final product? Is stigma the label which is pasted? Or is stigma a process, something which is built up? I personally feel, and this applies to almost every study in sociology and also in anthropology, that we should not lose the aspect of process, something which builds up. Gradually, it builds up. And there are so many actors, so many agencies which are building it up. Now you can see how media is building up, how newspapers are building it up, how people who talk through their lecture, how they are building up. A kind of opinion is created. I'm always reminded of Michel Foucault, who at one time said that when we talk about a subject, we create a discourse. It's a very nice statement. When you talk about a subject, the more you talk about it, you are creating a discourse, and this kind of discourse is being created. And what this discourse is leading to. So make a distinction between a stigma as a process, something which is built up. How the person comes to be stigmatized, it doesn't happen in a moment. It takes a time. It happens gradually. It happens slowly. And so, what is this process? And in this process, please find out what are the intervening stages through which it passes, so that stigma could be placed, and I would underline this statement, on a continuum rather than as a fixed category. You get my point? Rather than a fixed category which is just imposed on you, what you find is let's see, continuum, how this is built up. And therefore there can be a situation where there may be less stigma, there'll be more stigma, and you have to understand these things in qualitative term. And the third thing which comes up to my mind is the social structure which breeds stigma. What kind of a social structure is this which actually is giving rise to this? In which context stigma is likely to blossom, and which in context it may not blossom? I mean, what I have in mind is that stigma at the level of the kin group may not be of much operation in the Western world because their society is not kin oriented in the sense that our society is kin oriented and neighborhood oriented. Their stigma may be with respect to communities that where they would try to pass comments on Asians, on Chinese, on others, and they would say that they are the ones who have brought the disease. And this is something which has to be studied in the historical context. You cannot understand the situation in America unless you bring in the Chinese settlers who started coming to America from the 18th century and how they were treated. The very important material concerning the place of the Chinese in America and in Canada from 18th century onward. Now, these kinds of things continue because historical things are passed down. They're passed down from one generation to the other generation, and you can't just come out of this. And they are as real as any other thing. They're almost like ominous jinns. They are exercising their impact on us. Now, let us look at how the process comes in the context of Corona. And I've tried to bring in a couple of concepts which I will bring here. The first thing is what I would call reification of Corona. Hmm? How do you visualize Corona? I am not a biotechnologist. I am not a molecular geneticist. I'm also not a pathologist. I have not seen it. I have only seen the picture. Now, the way in which it is presented, sometimes it looks very beautiful, a picture of green and with having some kind of a corona over it, that round thing. So that the picture which it comes up, the reification of this. Now, the construction is biological. Construction is social. And in the imagination of people, in the imagery of people, in you and my imagery, people who are literate, people who know it is a biological body, and people who also know that this has been socially constructed, okay? And we are imagining Corona, okay? So for us, Corona is supposed to have life, but it doesn't have. It has life, but it has no soul. It has no mind. So it does not discriminate. It does not discriminate between you and me. I remembered the statement from Mike Ryan, who is the WHO expert, and he said that Corona does not discriminate between people. It does not discriminate between borders. It does not discriminate between ethnicity. It does not bother about color. It does not bother about whether you have a lot of money in your bank or you do not have. So, some kind of a what we use the term leveling effect. It tries to level everyone. Incidentally, as a footnote, I would say that Wikipedia has a list of all the prominent people in the world who died of corona. Now, that kind of a list is also available, which one can see, one who is interested in it. So it has its own life. Corona has its own life. It has its own nature. But what does it do to us? It actually, and here we are dealing with the social aspects. The first social aspect which comes up here is a very important concept to which we have not paid much attention, at least in the disciplines with which I am concerned. It has not paid much attention to, and this concept is fear. The fear which comes. We have tried to understand fear rather intuitively. Like stigma was understood in social psychology more. Fear has been understood in psychology. But coming to the domains of sociology and social anthropology, where there's some kind of what I would call institutionalization of fear. Now, the moment I tell you that there is an area which has a large number of corona patients, what you have is fear. The fear, the fear comes up. And why does this fear come? The fear in you. Because that the human bodies, and you cannot ignore human bodies at this point in time, the human bodies become different. They are seen differently. As my wife once said, that corona dehumanizes our mind. Dehumanizes our mind. It's a very pregnant statement with ideas. And this statement says that how human beings are seen differently. Body is not seen as a sacred, pure, clean entity. Bodies are seen as harboring germs. Bodies are seen as dirty. Bodies are seen as having infections. And therefore, the bodies have to be kept away. And it is the vulnerability of the body to catch it. Therefore, bodies are feared. Bodies are feared. Whose bodies are feared? Other human bodies. Although the origin of corona is supposed to be zoonotic, this is what they say. But now you start fearing other human beings. The environment is seen as polluted, and the climax is that you see your own body as your enemy. You see your own body as polluted. You see your own body as harboring it. I read an article in one of the newspaper which says that begin with the idea that you are harboring corona, and therefore begin with the premise that it is there. You do not know, and you may not come to know in spite of repeated tests, or you may be without any symptom. You may be having the problem. You have to protect others, and this is where lies, I will use this word, altruism. The altruism of humankind, that if I am wearing the mask, if I am sneezing into my sleeve, if I am sneezing into my mask, huh, and if I'm careful about my hygiene, washing my hands again and again, keeping the company of sanitizer. Okay, in that case, I'm protecting the others. This kind of an altruism has to come. So now look at, in these times of fear, what actually is happening is that, number one, the bodies are feared. Number two, the bodies are losing their identities. I read this was in one of the newspapers on 21st of May, and there was a man lying near a bus station, and bottom it was written COVID patient's body found. COVID patient body found. The man has the identity of being COVID. All other identities are eclipsed. All the other identities are pushed to the back seat. This is the identity which come up. So this fear has two aspects, intertwined aspect. And this is something which, as many people have said, including the director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, that this is something which is stopping us from going out and seeking treatment. It is preventing us from announcing ourselves as suffering from ailment. We are concealing it. We are hiding it. We are, we are suppressing our cough we are suppressing our sneeze, because no more now someone would say, when you sneeze, God bless you. Huh? On the contrary, if you sneeze, if you sneeze, they would start beating you up, as happened in Kolhapur. I mean, I read this. This was sometimes in March, when the things were not so grave as they are now. This man sneezed, and this led to a big fight. So you find it's different kind of a situation. So this fear has two aspects. The first aspect of the fear is getting infected. There's a first aspect. And therefore, it has led to changes in our behavior. Yesterday, I was at an eye clinic where I'd gone with my son for getting his eyes tested. And of course, my son was sitting with his eyes closed, with the liquid inside his eyes. And I was looking at one of the men who was checking the temperature and other things. After every few seconds, he would go and take out little sanitizer and rub, on his. Just go. After 3 seconds, 4 seconds, he would come. Now, in normal times, you would say this is an abnormal behavior. This is an example of obsessive compulsion that you're doing it. But in Corona time, this is a normal kind of a behavior. In fact, someone wrote when the flights started that this was a common thing. People were allowed to carry the sanitizer, and this is what they were doing at every point in time. Now, this how normalcy comes to be defined, and this is the first thing of getting infected. The second thing which comes is getting socially discriminated. Now that's the worst aspect. Socially discriminated because it is not only that I would suffer, but with me, my family would suffer. In fact, I was talking to someone who said that if God forbid, if something happens to me, and if I have to be rushed to the hospital, what would happen to my family? The kind of experience they would have, the kind of ignominy they will have to pass through, how they would be treated by the neighbors, and this would be some kind of an isolation, and the chains would be so much that the person would feel totally throttled. So therefore the discrimination, two things which go together. And so fear leads to what we will call shunning, shunning of the other. Your close relatives will go away, your family members will go away. Look at this phenomenal isolation one would experience, total isolation, that you are nowhere. Sociologically, I would see that this is the beginning of what is called breakdown of interactions. Breakdown of interaction. This would lead to what I would say individualization. That's a very serious thing. Individualization which occurs because of positive things. And here is the individualization which is occurring because of a kind of context, because of the corona time, when you feel as an individual, as completely cut off, as being left to be on your own. Look at the experiences, and some of these experiences are so heart-rending, so heart-piercing, that you read them and you cannot sleep for a few days. For example, the funeral of Dr. Silo. Dr. Silo was the first person from Meghalaya who unfortunately died of COVID. He was the builder of an institution, the famous hospital called Bethany Hospital. This was built by him, and he was one of the finest doctors. My daughter lives in Shillong, and she has been telling me about him. A phenomenal person, and he died of COVID. Now look at his funeral. The electric crematorium declined to do it because they did not have enough personal protective equipment. The village where he had a farmhouse, they also declined. And finally, after the High Court order, you just see the Honorable High Court had to intervene. And then he was given a funeral, was given a cremation in a Presbyterian, thing, and there were 11 people wearing, white PPEs who were there. The entire family was quarantined. And, we started finding that who brought it. And incidentally, his son-in-law, this is all in news, this son-in-law who, had traveled, he was a pilot, he traveled from New York to Delhi, and twice he was tested negative, and he happened to come to death. So we start finding the genesis from where it came, and I felt so sad for this man. In fact, one of the areas on which I intend to be working is Corona and death. Dead. How the dead. Just few days back, there was a story in the Hindu of how a man faced this problem of getting the dead, cremated. So this is it kind of thing. It brings what is called the phenomenal loneliness, the phenomenal individualism, the individuation, and things become very, very different in this kind of situation. Now, coming to the social structure, and I'll just take a few more minutes. Social structure, which gave rise to this. I was wondering, and this will be a good idea to investigate, a good idea to see, and this will bring me to this whole aspect of enemy. Enemy. I have used the term enemy earlier as well. That if you see Indian social structure, you would find that there has been a very prominent concept of spirit possession. And you can see striking similarities between spirit possession on one hand and corona on the other. Something which remains. Even today, when you go to village communities, you find cases after cases of possession. And all kinds of theories are there. Now, if you look at the similarities between spirit possession and corona affliction, you would find that both are external. Spirit comes from outside, corona comes from outside. So the distinction between inside and outside is drawn. You remain inside your house, corona will remain outside. That kind of a dichotomy which comes up. Now, this spirit comes on its own. Corona also comes on its own. Because why does it come? Because of one or the other kind of defilement. The spirit possesses you because you defiled the site where it lives. And corona because you went out, you spoke to people, you were in a crowd, and you defiled. Both bring illnesses. Both bring make the body heavy, heavy with fear, heavy with fever, and heavy with other things. And both require exorcism. Now, in exorcism here, it is the beating of the individual in the spirit position. But what happens in corona is equally punitive, because this kind of a punitive thing is supposed to be curative. For example, putting the person in isolation. I read also that in some contexts, even it was said that the corona patient will not have access to mobile phone or the social media site, although later on these orders were withdrawn. So you find striking similarities between these two. And this is where the Indian social structure comes up. And therefore, the aspect of enemy comes here, that enemy, corona is the enemy. And therefore, because it is the enemy, hence you should adopt what is called the warrior's approach. You should adopt some kind of an approach to mitigate. And this approach of mitigation is going to the war. So many of the countries use this. China, for example, said it is people's war against corona. And corona was defined as by France as invisible and elusive enemy. And there's so many, expressions which come that it is the warrior's approach which you have to follow for this. Now, when you follow the warrior's approach for this, many things are built up. The national, solidarity comes, cohesiveness comes, patriotism comes. You are able to handle this collectively, but at the same time, what is the latent thing which comes at the level of human society? What it leads to? The kind of stigma which comes up, and I told you that stigma is something which is going to last. So we can look at all this in the because the anthropologists are very fond of this. So I thought that finally I'll talk about one of the very important distinctions we have in anthropology between nature and culture. Nature refers to our endowment which has come to us from nature, from whatever we have found. Culture is something which we have built up. What it has shown, what Corona has shown, that how cultural prescriptions, cultural etiquettes, cultural modes of behavior, how they start breaking down, and we start returning to the state of nature, where there is a war of man against man. I'm reminded of Thomas Hobbes, who used this famous phrase, Homo homini lupus, man is a wolf to another man. How divisiveness is being created. And this is not that only, it's not that only I am concerned about it. I think in this kind of a scenario, everyone is concerned about how to fight this kind of a divisiveness, which is resulting from stigma, which is resulting from this kind of discrimination, which is resulting from fear, shunning, leading to stigmatization. That's the continuum on which it is happening. And you find in this scenario, you find another duality which is emerging. And the duality which is emerging is your relatives, your neighbors, they are all become your enemies because they want to protect themselves. So who is your friend? Your friends are the doctors. Your friends are the health workers. Your friends are the policemen. Your friends are all those people who are helping you to survive. Look at this interesting scenario, and that was the reason why we celebrated the work of these doctors on the I think the Janta Curfew Day. Yeah, we celebrated their work. So see how it's a very interesting thing to look at how kinship, neighborhood, friendship, these are the three things, how they are dissolving into enmity, into a kind of enmity which we are understanding, and come to the other one where there are people who are your friend. And if you look into the case studies, you will find that I told you funerals and cremations, they have become a very lonely affair. I remember my predecessor at Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Institute, Professor Hari Vasudevan, he passed away, and his daughter said that we will not be able to see him. Only one of his friends will see him. And look at this kind of a situation which comes up during Corona time. So, who become your friends? And they are all these people. This will bring me all these dualities which emerge between the inside and the outside, in group and the out group, right? Self and the other, which is now built up, in this. The question which comes up: how can we mitigate the stigma? How can we fight stigma? How can we create a society where people transcend stigma, where people do not fear, where people bring with this element of empathy? It is not something that others suffer. That is why these dichotomies are very important. It's not that the others suffer. Tomorrow, I may also be the sufferer. So, this aspect of empathy, what we start wondering, where has this empathy gone? Where has it evaporated? This kind of empathetic attitude, feeling for the other. After all, there are doctors, there are health workers, there are nurses, the policemen, and look at, they are most vulnerable. And if you take up these statistics, you'll find a large number of these have suffered and are suffering socially and also suffering physically. So in this kind of a situation, how to create a society which is empathetic? And for this, we need to do a concerted work. Many of the things have been said again and again. For example, one of the things is that we must bring correct information about the disease. We should combat any kind of misinformation which goes on. We should try to come out with the latest scientific thing. We should also change our language. Actually, anthropologists are very sensitive to language, the use of language, because language is something which creates discrimination. So instead of saying that they are COVID patients, or they're COVID sufferers, we can use a more sensitive language. The person is not infecting others, but the virus is being transferred. So language is very important, the way we use it, and I will refrain from using the kind of expression which are used in general public. And just one example I will give. One of the persons said, "Do corone pakde gaye." Now, under quote, as if this criminological terminology, this kind of disease terminology, which is actually dehumanizing. This has to be changed. And the concerted efforts have to begin. More and more people should write on this, that how language is creating discrimination, and how language needs to be changed. The stigmatizing terminology, the criminalizing terminology, this has to be changed. This whole model of court and punishment, this has to go away. Of course, even today there are many shrines which actually treat the cases of supernatural affliction under this. Court means that you are punished, so the ghost is punished. And how the ghost is punished? The ghost is punished, punitively, by punishing the ghost physically. So the person is beaten up, and it is believed that the ghost will suffer. So this kind of thing has to come. So two things have been said again and again. One is that we have to come out with the latest information about the disease and disseminate this information as much as possible. Number two, a very sensitive, humanizing language has to be used, and we have to look at these things in a model which is of friends and not of enemies. No enemies, there are friends only. And we have to realize, and that is why I'm trying to say it again and again, how the disease has created divisiveness. And therefore, we have to realize that these pandemics create divisiveness. Divisiveness at all levels. People are fighting for food. The hoarding, going to the shop and buying so much so that tomorrow, what will happen to others? We are not bothered about it. This altruism has broken down. And this altruism has to be revived. And therefore, we need to go back to the model of friendship. Lastly, I like to tell something else because I feel that we as anthropologists can contribute a lot. You see, uh, and this is especially for all your listeners who are not from the discipline of anthropology. This is for them. Anthropologists choose communities which are of strangers. My teacher, Professor T.N. Madan, used to say that anthropologists establish intimate relations with strangers, meaning thereby that you go live with people who are not known to you, people who are bizarre in many terms, people who are different from you, and you live with them with as much of uh, friendship as it is possible. We use a term called rapport establishment, that you go and establish friendship with people and you try to learn their ways of living, how they live, what kind of things they do. Now, here recently, I read a paper against this background. I read a paper by Nancy Shepherd Hugh. She's an American anthropologist, very renowned. And this was on xenophobia, that you are fearing the foreigners. So the moment you would see any foreigner in your midst, you will immediately start connecting that foreigner with XYZ. And this XYZ can be certain negative attributes or negative characteristic. That is how we start thinking. Xenophobia, which comes up, which actually may breed, you know, ethnicism, which I spoke. Now she asks here, Nancy asks here, what is the opposite of xenophobia? She says the opposite of xenophobia is xenophilia. She says this word xenophilia, she says it is not a sought after word. She says this word comes in the context of botany, where you talk about one particular plant living, in the context of the other plants in the same ecological thing. And he said that this xenophilia is not, and I like this, xenophilia is not that you appreciate the others, but xenophilia is freedom from the fear of the other. Underquote. Freedom from the fear of the other. That other is fearful. So what xenophilia does is it gives you freedom from that. Freedom from that. That the others are as human as we are. The others are not different from us. We all suffer equally. We all have the same kind of predispositions, notwithstanding our cultural differences and notwithstanding our economic differences, economic stratification. We are all one. This kind of a realization will actually bring us closer to all, to the community, bring us closer to the community of sufferers, community of people who are on ventilators, people who are in the intensive care, who are in the quarantine center. This kind of that we are all one and health is one, our health, our health. Now, this is something, this kind of a feeling has to come. The anthropologist can contribute a lot in these terms, understanding the other and understanding the other with as much of empathy as is possible. I have great regard for the anthropologist who spent, the lifetime studying people in the most inhospitable circumstances, living with them in their context and trying to understand them from within, how these people look at them. So perhaps this contribution would really be really be tremendous. In other words, what we have to do is we have to create an empathetic society. And this empathetic society is not only be created by you or me, or by Professor Majumdar or other distinguished people. Huh? What is sometimes called Angelina Jolie effect. Huh? That if you bring in very famous people, they will be able to give a boost to your campaign. It's not this. It should come at all levels. It should come at the level of the lowest people. It should come at all levels. This realization that we are all one, and this kind of altruism would create a new society, would create a society of philanthropists, those who will help others. In these moments, what is needed? In these moments, what is needed? A kind of friendship. What is needed? A kind of conviviality. What is needed? A kind of empathy and a feeling for others, and the feeling that our health is one, we all suffer equally. So thank you very much. This is what
Excellent, sir.
I
Excellent.
have to say. And
Thanks.
the last thing, which I just forgot, that please don't think that we, the intellectuals, are the only ones who are doing these things. People are not passive. Professor Roy Berman, B.K. Roy Berman used to say that this is wrong to believe that the people are passive. They are themselves doing it. Look at how people in the villages of Odisha are trying to fight the stigma which is emerging at their own level with their own means. These are commendable efforts, and these efforts should occupy the center stage. We have to learn from people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this very, very impressive lecture, and I think it will help us a lot. And here, I'd like to invite PPM sir. Sir, are you with us? Yes, yes, coming. And it's our great honor to have PPM with us, Professor Partha Pratim
I'm
Majumdar.
really honored. I'm
Yes.
really honored. I want to share with all of you that he was my selector. He selected me for the Anthropological Survey of India. It's because of this I have been able to serve this great organization. I have great regards for him. And I also want to tell you that when I was a student in my master's, I wrote to him a letter about one of his publications, and he sent it. I still have with me with his signature, and this is way back of 1974 or so. Thank you, sir. I'm so grateful that you could attend to this and you could listen to this. I was conscious of the fact that you were listening to me, so I may have committed some mistake out of my sheer reactivity syndrome. Thank.
No, no,
Anyway,
thank you very much. This was just absolutely wonderful, and you're very kind. And what I really liked about your lecture is that you sort of divided it into multiple parts in terms of the concepts, principles, and some applications. So this was applications, meaning negative applications that lead to stigmatization of individuals. I'm also very grateful to you for referring to Irving Goffman's book. Not many people know of this particular book. And right now I'm in the thick of writing an essay where I'm quoting a lot from Irving Goffman's work. Also, the way that you related fear with stigma, again, I think that requires a deep insight into these kinds of psychosocial processes to be able to relate this. Right now, I personally think I have one quick comment and a question for you. We are, probably going to open up the lockdown on the 31st. So come 1st of June, factories will open, offices will open, and so on and so forth. One of my major fears has to be is just this, that as we open up offices, there would be some people who will come to factories, who will come to offices, who may have been infected with coronavirus, who may also have been admitted to a hospital because of COVID. As they come into office, I just wonder whether many of their own colleagues will not treat them differently with an eye towards stigmatization. This, I think, will be a major challenge, and I hope that employers, factory employers or directors of institutions will be cognizant of this and will try to actively dispel stigmatization that may happen after the lockdown is lifted. I would love to hear your comments on this thought of mine.
Mhm. Yes, sir, I fully agree with you. In fact, what I thought was that we will prepare at the Anthropological Survey of India, we'll prepare some kind of guidelines with respect to this, how to combat stigma. And it is important that we address some of these factories, the industries, the organizations, and tell them that this is something they have to completely avoid. They should not succumb to what I have said all through, this enemy approach. They should not succumb to that. And therefore, it is important that concertedly, consciously, we have to carry it out. To tell these people that, of course, some of them might have been institutionalized, some of them might have been hospitalized, and some of them may be home quarantined. Now they are normal. So this only urging and again, this is something which would help. I think the departments of social work and others, they should take up the lead, and also some kind of a plea to be sent to all of them that this is what they should subscribe. The way the government sent out a large number of notifications concerning how to clean your offices, in the same way, this kind of thing, because this is going to be really a major problem. And once again, a new dimension would be added to the already existing stratification. So this is the only way we can fight. Yeah.
Uh, well, sir, would you like to add anything to it? Sir,
Sir's mic
your
is
mic is
mute.
muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I muted my mouth. No, I said this is a fine explanation, and indeed, these are the kinds of thoughts that are important for us to understand and realize. Um, are there any questions from the audience? Maybe we should
Yes, sir.
take a
We, we,
few questions from the audience.
we have some questions. Like one question we have got is that once Obama's chief of staff put it after the Lehman Brothers fell in 2008, that you never want a serious crisis to go to West. If we are not to squander this serious crisis to go to West, what would be your take from this?
Say it again. I mean, I didn't follow the last part.
Yeah, the question
If
was that it was said that you should not want a serious crisis to go to West. Now, if you think
Mhm.
that we should not allow this one to go to West, what should be your take? What should be your take from it?
Well, the simple answer and one line answer is that we have to become conscious of the whole thing. That this is what is happening. We should be conscious of the fact that this is what it would lead to. We should be we should be conscious of the futuristic aspect, and therefore it is the high time that we should try to stop it. That's the thing, and this can be done only through some kind of mass campaign. You're trying to these days social media are very powerful, and social media can be used for these things, for coming out with the positive thing that this is the crisis, but that is how we can contain these crises. In fact, a lot of information about the scientific aspect should come to us, that how this disease has come, the difference between coronavirus and COVID, okay, which many people do not know, and the what we are learning from these statistics, everything should come. The society has to become as knowledgeable as is possible, and especially I personally think the vernacular press, the vernacular newspapers can play a very important role in this. The point is to educate people. That's the thing.
So
Yeah.
there's one question you talked about the institutionalization of stigma. There is a recent phenomena that one of our courts passed an interim order that is now under scrutiny, of course, by the Supreme Court. But it said that a migrant labor, if one has to board one state vehicle that crosses the state border, he or she has to ensure that they are corona negative. Now, don't you
Hmm.
think that this orders like this inherently quarantines somebody and allows someone to be normal and mark others as deviant?
Well, the answer to this is that surely, no, we have to have a more positive, positive view of the whole thing and non-discriminatory, eh? And therefore, we have to begin with the human level that. That who knows that the person may be negative today but may be positive tomorrow. You do not know. I also read in the newspaper that one state is asking that you bring a corona free certificate, only then you would be allowed to enter. Now these things has to be taken rather, they have to be examined, that what are the human consequences of these things. That's very important. The human consequences. And see, you in your own presentation, you said that how the stigma affects the poor people, the lower classes more. eh? So they were the ones who become the guinea pigs of the entire exercise. You read it, I think, I'm sure, that one of the ministers went to Karnataka, and he had to be quarantined for 7 days. But this was in the newspaper. But he said that we are immune to this, just because we are doing some very important things. So this type of a thing, when it comes up, the different rules for different people, then the problem. Yeah, so
Problem
this is
aggravates.
something which we have to create. My answer is we have to create a society in which this is three line answer. We have to create a society where we are knowledgeable. Everyone is knowledgeable about it. Number two, we know what our rights and duties are. Hmm? Number three, the third is that we should disseminate this knowledge to others. If the rule is that you should not call more than 33% of people to your office, abide by that. If the rule is that you sanitize your office, do it. So in other words, following the protocol, whether it is of quarantine or lockdown or the protocol of isolation, follow it, because eventually all this is in your interest. So once the knowledge society comes up, things will be just sorted out. Yeah.
Sir, in respect to this, I have a personal question that you are talking about this knowledge society, but now
Huh?
you are giving stress to this knowledge society. But this modern world, which is the current world, which is so much heavily skewed towards the radical stereotyping, fake news, opinionated big media, motivated WhatsApp propaganda, in which how do you discriminate what is the actual knowledge and what is not? Do you think that from the governmental side some authoritarian uh, dissemination of actual proper authenticated knowledge is missing?
Yes, not only from the government, but also from a large number of civil societies, the non-governmental organization. It is their duty. In fact, I am not reading much about the contribution that the NGOs are making with respect to disseminating what is the correct knowledge. Say, for instance, I spoke to you about stigmatizing terminology. Okay, so, what should be the alternative to this? Which kind of a terminology should come? Some suggestions have to come. So, all this can be counteracted by the three-prong attack, and this will be government, the civil society, and the communities. The communities of whom? Communities of scientists, communities of scholars, communities of the intellectuals, those who have to come forward and see. It is not necessary that everyone writes for the newspaper. It is not necessary that everyone goes to the social media and gives comment. Like the traditional saying, "Jot se jot jagate chalo," meaning thereby you tell your people who are around you, tell your children. After all, the change begins at the local level. Charity is it begins at home. So start at that level. You can share these ideas with the people who work for you, and this is not necessary that you should go to the national media for this. The change has to begin at the local level. But I see, and this is something which pains me a lot, I see that many of us are, or those who can do, this is what they are not doing. This is what they are not doing. Starting the revolution of ideas at the local level, so that things are taken care of. If suppose someone in your staff gives a misinformation, what you should do? You should immediately correct him. Begin with what we call in anthropology dialogic approach. That if you are saying this, why are you saying this? Huh? And confront those ideas at the local level. Now this is important because all of us have to take this lead. It's not just that you pass on the buck to someone, but when all of us join together, the things will be very different. Yeah.
And so, one more point, is it also possible that out of this stigmatization, even a backlash mentality can develop in the targeted community? One of my friends,
Yeah.
after getting our
Hmm.
card, he sent
Hmm?
me a very touching message. He told me
Yes.
that we wrote that the verdict is out. So he
Hmm.
refers to that and he says, "That's why you are correct. The verdict is really out, and we have already accepted that this particular virus is friendly to certain communities and not to certain others." So,
Hmm.
do you think that it may so happen that at one point of time, if we continuously stigmatize one particular class or community, then they will also develop a confronting attitude to refute the normative suggestions? Can this be possible?
Yes. Yes, of course, this is very much possible. But how will you counteract it? That's the whole thing.
That's the whole
The
thing.
it can, only you will counteract it only by education. That's the only thing. Otherwise, there is no other alternative. Yeah.
So I have received another question. Uh,
Hmm.
it is that Corona period is showing that the concept of religion has not much of uh, relevance to us right now, and there are other uh, so-called places of worship are not being very important, as you said, that they can come to our houses. Now, do you think that it's a long-lasting impact and it can change the society as a whole to some extent?
Well, I gave this example in the beginning, that how this period is bringing about qualitative changes in our thinking. Now, one of the important things which has happened is that religious institutions, religious sites, religious places,
Mhm.
okay, these places have become almost, under quote, unimportant, meaning thereby that it is not necessary that you visit these places for getting divine grace, or for getting divine help. What this period has taught us, that we can be religious at home, we can be religious inside. This, I would call this process interiorization of religion rather than the exteriorization. So I know people who have been visiting the temple every day. My father used to be one of them, that he would not have his morning tea unless he had visited the temple. But of course, now he doesn't go. He's an old man. But but now people who have been having this kind of a schedule, they have to change themselves. So gradually, this is going to be interiorized. I think in times to come, what is going to be affected will be pilgrimage. That is going to be affected to a very large extent, and there will be virtual pilgrimages. The temple will come to your screen and you will be able to offer puja. My father once told me that there was a saint in Haridwar. This saint will give you sannyas, will ordain you to the sannyasi order if you just write to him. You send a postcard and will give it to you. So, so these institutions, these physical institutions, what I'm saying is, physical institutions may lose their sheen, may lose their shine. And what will happen is this interiorization. I don't think religion has declined in any way. I don't think people are becoming more religious. They may be worshipping. Perhaps they may be getting up every morning and telling God, "Please don't give Corona to me. Huh? I should be free from this." Praying for this, and they may be offering food to God also, some kind of prasadam, as it is called. So this interiorization is a great thing, and so pilgrimage is bound to be affected. In again mainly because of social distancing. Because social distancing, I tell you, Bakshi Sahab, social distancing will remain, will continue, It will become a part of our day to day, our quotidian behavior. They say that I will not come very close to you. I will not shake hands with you. The physical distance is going to be there for a longer time, and so also our habits will change. And now I observe people who are very careful while sneezing, while coughing. These are natural things, normal things which happen. So they are careful about it. I remember when Commonwealth Games were being organized, the then Chief Minister of Delhi and also the Home Minister, they should that people should bring about behavioral changes in them. And one thing was the spitting. Okay. In fact, incidentally, I'll tell you, I have asked one of my colleagues to write a short paper on why do we spit. I studied in England. I was in Cambridge for quite some time, and being an anthropologist, you observe people what they are doing, and you're looking around what is happening. I used to see people would rarely spit. They would not. And in case they are smoking, those days people used to smoke a lot. If they smoke and finally they finish the cigarette, they would keep it in their pocket, waiting for the garbage bin to come where it will be consigned. So what I'm saying is that these kinds of habits will change. Perhaps tomorrow we will not need the punitive sanctions to make people not to spit. They themselves would know that what are the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of a living. I have seen people washing their hands and quite frequently. I have seen people being careful about the mores of how they have to behave. Incidentally, I read George Washington's this, I think, which everyone should read. He copied from some other sources what are the norms of civility, and this is excellent. I will advise your listeners to read it. That what are how you should conduct yourself when you are alone and when you are in the public. And this applies to, say, for example, picking your nose, or or cleaning your ear. Things which should not be done publicly, and so this is leading to a more control over your body. So there's no need for people to tell that don't comb your hair while you're eating. Hmm? Like in Maharashtra, I remember when I went for a visit, in many of the local hotels, it was written Kanga Karunai, but don't comb your hair. So there's no need. People themselves know. So this kind of what I will call internalization of the right practices. That is very important. Internalization, which goes inside you, that I have to behave in this manner. You see, for example, it's very common in India. The people eat pan. It's very common, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan. People love eating pan. And I remember my grandmothers also used to eat a lot of pan, but they would always keep urn, which they called peekdan, where they would spit and then they would clean on their own. They used to keep it with them. And when my grandmothers used to go, say, to someone's house, they will carry it with them. These kinds of norms of civility which have to come. I was mightily impressed when I read George Washington's those principles which he copied, and they are still very relevant. Yeah.
So I'd like to have one more follow-up question regarding this concept of religion, and then we can change a bit. My question
No,
is,
no, you can go on. I am fine. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
my question is that in the concept of religion itself, normally we see that with its evolution, we set certain standards that if you do certain things, then you are at sin, and if you are doing something else, then you are rewarded. So, don't you think that in this, once again, that discrimination and stigmatization appears in the very concept of religion itself? So, is it
Yes, of
avoidable there?
course. Because you see, religion is built upon the notions of exclusion, discrimination, and inclusion. These three principles go together: who is to be included, who is to be excluded, and how discrimination occurs. And the norms are so stringent and so strict that you have to abide by it. For example, you must wear a unstitched cloth when you enter. And those, say, for example, if you are wearing a stitched cloth, you will not be allowed. This kind of a discrimination goes on. But when you interiorize religion, when religion becomes internalized, then these things just vanish. That there is no need for you to bother about it. There's no need for you to count your rosary only after having bath. I mean, I get up in the morning and I also recite certain mantra when I have not even brushed my teeth. So that the life will become very different, very very different in these kinds of situations. So external religion and its mores, its norms, its etiquettes are different from religion when it is internal. This
So,
is something which you
do
can
you
see.
mean to say, sir, that if religion is internalized, then the basic embedded fear factor goes away?
Fear factor disappears. It is actually not only the fear factor disappear, but the intermediary, the intercessors between you and God, those who are helping you they also disappear. And this will be a new kind of a society which will come into existence. eh. If this is pursued, it will be a different kind of a society. We'll be able to link us with the outside world. But please remember that a large number of people are non-believers. The percentage of non-believers is increasing. You can see in your own households. You may be exemplarily religious. Hmm? You may be, but your children may be away from that. Your children may ask for certain proofs, and they may be very different. When you have the household rituals, in my own house, I have seen when we have this household ritual, say at the time of Diwali or at other things. My children, if they join, their commitment and their involvement is less, much less than involvement of my wife and I. This is it. And when you come to the generation of the grandparent, they're completely away. Huh? For them, religion doesn't have the same kind of meaning than what it has for us. They may be spiritual, the belief in that there are powers over us. This is very important. And if you start analyzing, you'll find that the scientific principles are telling us many things which we didn't understand, and which at one time we thought are being caused by the pantheon of gods and goddesses. Today we know what it is. So, I mean, Max Weber used to say that the world is going to become demythologized. Yeah? This is the word. We lose this kind of the mystification, demystification of the word. That there are fairies, there are jinns, and there are goblins, and there are gods, and there are angels. This kind of a word, this very colorful word, this would disappear once we know why this happens. I mean, at one time we believed that rain comes when God Indra wants, but I think now we have a different explanation for for this. And therefore, this is a very important debate because I work on comparative religion as well. There's a very important debate within the domain of religion is, is that what exactly is the shape of religion now? What exactly is religious congregation? Is religious congregation religious, or is religious congregation social? That you go and you participate socially. So that kind of a religiosity or that kind of a religiousness, so to say, has certainly disappeared. But at the same time, we cannot miss out the domain of eeriness, the domain of something very different. I mean, why? If I ask you, Bakchi Saab, why horror films are so popular? Even I watch a large number of horror films, not because these horror films are true, but they are telling about a different imagination. I would look at these horror films from the point of view of how human beings can imagine, some kind of a world which is different, not because these things are real. And the moment we try to bring the horror film to the level of reality, eh, it will fail. It will fail. The fear factor will disappear. On the other hand, these fear films or the programs which are supposed to bring fear, they become comedies because they are not able to arouse that. So if I see science fictions, it's because just to see how human imagination can run, how it can be untrammeled human imagination. That's the thing. Because eventually I believe that if there is any entity which can explore all dimensions, it is human mind. It is human mind. It is the proper application of your mental faculties. People come and say, oh, I can't remember, I have poor memory. I say, look, you are saying this because you have not tried to memorize. The moment you take the resolve that I have to memorize, you will not fail. So I believe in this, that if there is any entity I know, it is my own self, it is my own body. It is my own body. You exist, Bakshi Saab, because I exist. Because I exist, that is why you exist. And suppose in a moment of time I cease to exist, you also don't exist. So this whole word is meaningful to me because I'm existing. Okay, so if this is the reality, then I must know myself the best. And I believe, and through your medium, I want to tell that mind is great. And if I were to be born human again, that the field on which I'll work is the working of the human mind. Great anthropologists like Claude Lévi-Strauss devoted his entire life trying to understand what he called the universal mind. All human beings having the same mind, the same potentiality. Okay, and so mind is the most fertile thing to be investigated. And if you pay attention to your mind, and if you ask critical questions, for example, existence of God, existence of these things, the thing, you will be able to get a rational, convincing answer. Do not succumb to a factor just because it is there. You have to question it. I believe in the Socratic method of questioning. Is it really there? If you start questioning properly, all these misinformation will go away. Ask a question. Simple. I was talking about the reification of Corona, how we conceptualized it. You remember some helmets came which looked like Corona. Huh? You also remember that someone dressed up as Yamraj, and Yamraj as analogous to Corona. Now these things came up. You have to question this kind of a reification. That why this happened? What kind of a reality it is arousing? It is arousing not in people like you and me who are working on this actively, but in larger public, how they are able to see. I think that the 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 cardinal principle to knowledge is questioning, and questioning yourself is trying to find an answer, trying to write an answer to this, not bothering about what others have been saying. Yeah.
So you talked about the use of language is very important. You said, and you said that the particular usage of terminology determines whether we are getting discriminatory or not. Now, I find it is one of my personal questions that when you name any new virus or any contagion, you attach the place name where it first was
Well,
derived
you
and
know
how
it, Baptista. You know, WHO has already said this in 2015. There are strict guidelines from World Health Organization that these viruses should not be named after the place, they should not be named after the community, they should not be named after the individual. So the term like Chagas syndrome or Marfan syndrome, they must completely be given up. The name of the virus should be on the basis of its biogenetic characteristics. That would be the best. The moment you bring in the name of the place, hmm, or name of the community, the stigma is built.
yes.
Fear, shunning, stigma is bound to come. But I don't know why these, if I'm not mistaken, I think Professor Majumdar would correct me, that these are 2015 guidelines that how the viruses should be named. I mean, I did not look into that material because this was beyond my lecture. But I distinctly remember these guidelines came that how they should be named, and we should also explain while naming that why we are naming it like this,
Yes.
why we are naming it like this, and also various variants of this. So, coronavirus, for example, what are the various types? After all, mutations are possible. So, what kinds of different mutants will come? Whenever we use a term, we must be able to explain it as clearly as possible so that no miasma of misunderstanding remains there, so that we are able to communicate it correctly, and that kind of a thing must be communicated as rightly and as correctly as possible. The further transmission of this, and this recently happened, the president of America said this is China virus. Later on, of course, he gave a different statement, and this debate came up. You can't say it like this. That after all, the virus had its own characteristics, its own properties, and that must be must be, yeah.
So we must also develop a kind of community neutral nomenclature
Yes,
practices.
yes, yes. That's a very important thing. You look here. We have always been concerned about the names which are given. You see, anthropology is very well known because it had, questioned the terms which were used earlier. At one time, the societies which today are called tribal society, they were called primitive at one time. Now this word has completely been given up because it is derogatory. It is pejorative. Not only that, many people said that even the word tribe is not neutral. And so we have to look for some other kind of an alternative to this. They should be neutral. They should not arouse any kind of a value at any level. Completely neutral. And the moment these neutral words become loaded, they become hued, they become different. They should be dropped, and new language should come. You see, look here. Language is the most important thing. How language communicates discrimination. The words which are used. The moment you say that this person infected the other, eh, the meaning is different. And when we say it was transmitted, it's a different thing. Hmm? Let's suppose I am positive. I transmit it to my wife because my wife shares less proximate distance with me. Okay? We live in the same house. So I have not infected her, I have transmitted. Eventually, it is, of course, the virus has gone from me to her or from her to me. But but it will be an honorific way of saying the way in which we communicate. And therefore we have to pay a lot of importance to the language. And I do not know how this has to be done, that how to correct the media machinery for the kind of language they use, the kind of words they use. But they should all be told. They should all be told that this is something which they should not do. That the language should be neutral, language should be sensitive, and language itself should perform the task of pedagogy, task of educating. So this is important. I am very particular about this stigmatizing language. And in one of the webinars, I suggested that someone should take up a study of these kinds of words which are used, and should think in terms of dropping them and taking the institutions face to face, telling them that this is what it is doing. Okay? Yeah.
And I have one last question I'd like to put up to you. In
Yeah.
every country, every developed or developing country, perhaps there are some groups who are considered forever foreigners. Now, do you anthropologically find any practice that whenever any such uh, pandemics come, there is a tendency of one-to-one mapping with such forever foreigner communities with the viruses and the attacks and the so-called othering
Hmm.
effect immediately
Hmm.
turns on?
Yes. Yes. You are absolutely right that, like, in Delhi, I do not think that there are many people who are originally from Delhi. All are migrants. They have come from different parts of the country at different points in time. Hmm? They have kept their links alive, links with their kinspersons in the villages or in the towns alive. They continue to speak their native language, although they have also acquired the language which is spoken in the city. But it is not only for the native that they are the outsider, they also think themselves as outsiders. There are two levels. They also think, oh, we came from this place. So this kind of an insider and outsider distinction, this continues to remain. Actually, we've used the term in group and out group for this. In group, people who are of my group, and people who are who are outsiders. So this distinction remains. And whenever something happens, it is the othering. You use the word othering. Is the other who has to be blamed. They are the ones who have brought it. But see, if suppose there's a situation where the insiders are in minuscule, very little number of the insider, and everyone is an outsider. Everyone has come from outside. Such a situation is going to be less. However, what happens is that there are recent migrants and there are the older migrants. Sometimes we make a distinction between Purana and Naya. That this distinction was made with reference to the Kashmiris, Purane Kashmiri and Naye Kashmiri, those who came now and those who came at a later time. This distinction is also made. Then that a large number of colonies in different parts of the country are ethnic based. Say, for instance, Matunga is known for a good population of people from Tamil Nadu, Matunga in Bombay, or for that matter, Chittaranjan Park in Delhi, where I live, is a Bengali colony. These are the people who came from Bengal, and its earlier name is East Bengal. Yeah, displaced persons society. So this kind of a thing. So what will happen is that these kinds of pockets which come, again the same thing, those who are coming here and those who are the insider. So this insider outsider in group out group distinction is perennial. It is going to continue. Now there are social processes which try to mitigate this distinction, people coming together, but differences are continuing to remain, and therefore it is the duty of these kinds of associations which have this, to think in terms of as much of integration of people as possible, because you see, cultural pockets are bound to remain. Okay, so Bengalis in Chittaranjan Park will continue to speak Bangla, although they may not write it. They may not be able to read it. But this is, or Durga Puja as a cultural performance is going to continue. So cultural pockets are going to remain. But these cultural pockets can also remain and also live together with with amity, with friendship. Right? After all, cultures are resilient. I mean, cultures don't die out. One of the lessons we have learned when we looked at the impact of globalization on culture, one lesson we have learned is that globalization has not homogenized cultures. And if there is a homogeneity, it is only superficial. Each culture has its own gusto. Each culture has its own spirit. Each culture has its own geist, its own power, its own strength. And therefore, it will remain. If this is going to be so, it is better to negotiate with other cultures on an equalitarian basis. And therefore, we will be able to have a mosaic of culture which is properly united. Yeah.
So the concept of indigeneity is actually a highly scalable idea, and the solution is to expand it to the highest extent.
Yes, yes, and this whole idea of indigenous, something which is our own. Not to say that certain things are indigenous. You need empirical evidence. Suppose I say that we are the indigenous people of this land, we need evidence for this. Apart from the evidence we have of the oral literature, that we were the first ones who came and did this thing, to clean the area and we have settled down, first settler, that thing has to be there. So how we define ourselves is important here to understand this. Yeah.
So one last question here, that it primarily appears that fear is the main reason why this stigmatization starts really. The fear of getting infected, the fear of getting into this trauma. Now, the problem is if this stigma enhances to a large scale, then probably whosoever is on the other end, they will simply not disclose their conditions because of this. And that may be more infective than the original condition. So, don't you think that it is actually a counterproductive measure to inflict this stigma upon others?
Well, yes, this is what I said in the first part of my lecture, that look, when you look at Goffman's work, there you find that he is taking examples of certain conditions which are different. Say, for example, someone who is abnormal. And so these are some kind of permanent statuses which will remain. But when it comes to a situation which is creating infection, okay, something which is bound to affect others, fear which is generated is mammoth. Fear of getting ill, fear of getting isolated, fear of getting the family in jeopardy. Now these fears are there, and that is why the person who is having symptoms will not disclose. This is exactly which is going to happen. So how this stigma is stopping people from seeking help, is stopping people from speaking to others about their condition. So what is very important? Your life is very important. Yeah? Even if all these things are there, you must save yourself. It is Jan and Jahan, that kind of a thing. So yes, true that this is going to affect, but the fear sometimes may have a centrifugality. Look at the case of Ebola. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, there were only 4 cases of people in America who were infected by Ebola. But but the fear was so much eh, that it generated a lot of literature. Smithsonian Museum, they erected an exhibition on pandemic in Africa. So the response was much more than that. So fear is one factor which cannot be discounted. So I use the word institutionalization of fear, which means the fear is being being created by the institutionalized things which are happening. Now it is in the context of what we are doing and what is emerging out of it. What is emerging out of it? So when my house is given a label because I am quarantined, because I'm positive, COVID positive, it is in fact supposed to save me and also prevent others from suffering. But what is the outcome which comes? So there it becomes counterproductive. In fact, I think almost every newspaper has attended to this, that do not conceal your illness. In case you have this, please speak to the doctor, the nearest doctor who is available, and seek the opinion and act according to that. Watch your symptoms. You see, in case you have what your symptom. In other words, the body is telling you what you are suffering from, and keep an eye on what the body speaks. Keep in mind all these symptoms which come, and keep on sharing with your medical personnel, and follow the protocols which are given. Now, this is the best way to live. Now, if suppose the institution tells you do not spit, don't spit. But these are universal civil manners that you shouldn't do it. There's no need for the institution to come and say they don't do it. I mean, I used to be you, since you introduced me also as the principal of Hindu College. At one time, I'll tell you a story. See, uh, I have never gone to my institution, whether it was a college from where I started teaching way back in 1976, immediately after my master's in sociology, later on in the department, and wherever I went, I was always formally dressed. I always wore shoes which were polished, and I used to polish them myself. I used to wash my own clothes. Still now I do it. I do, my own washing. Why I did it? Very, very, clean. Because I learned right in my early years that when you are conducting field work, you are observing people. People are also observing you. Don't think only in terms of your perspective that you are there to observe them, but they are also observing you. They are also learning from you. And in case you bring to their doorstep good manners, good ways of behavior, it will leave a good impression on them. So when I was the principal and also when I was the head of the department, I would sometimes tell the male lecturers who were a little close to me, I'll tell them, you should not come to the college without proper shave. huh? You should not come to the college in, informal dresses. You should always be very formally, you should be formally dressed up because the students are observing you. And I used to tell them that, look, I have raised two children and now I'm raising one grandchild. Now, both these children of mine, they used to, after returning from the college, they used to talk to their mother about, and their mother happens to be my wife. So they would tell their mother what all they observed in the college. They would talk about their teachers. So the teachers were not only being discussed there, the teachers were coming home, their images, and therefore it becomes important that you should subscribe to, if you can, to the proper ways of conducting yourself. And what Corona has taught us is that these are simple ways of managing your body as best as you can. Simple things. And this will leave a, you know almost an indelible impression, as I said, on us, managing your body, managing your own self. Yeah.
Okay, sir, thank you so very much. So, probably to sum up everything, you ultimately say that it is the most important thing is to acquire cross checked, authenticated knowledge and to conduct yourself rationally, going by the
Well, the conclusion is that we have to be good human beings.
good human beings.
That's good human
Wonderful.
being,
Uh,
and and
probably
good.
Probably we
And
asked you too many times the same question because the questions are perhaps common and the answers, as Bob Dylan said, are blowing in the wind. The only question
yes,
is whether we are
yes,
convincing ourselves with the answers or not.
yes,
That is the
yes,
real issue.
yeah, yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
so very
We
much,
have
sir.
to, we have to look inwardly. We have to
Sure,
look in ourselves,
sure,
ourselves. I told you, for me, if there is anything I know, is my own self. If there's anything I know, is my own body. If you begin with this, so everything has to be critically examined at my level. And then only I will have the strength and the authority and the legitimacy to tell others when I have examined it myself. Yeah.
thank you so very much, sir. Thanks
Thank you.
for
I'm so
spending so
grateful
much
to
of
you
time with us.
for this opportunity to speak to you and also to Professor Majumdar, to give my respect to all of you. And I will be looking forward to interacting with you
Sure,
again.
sir. Sure, we'll get
Thank
back.
you.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Yeah.
you so very
Thank you.
much.
Grateful to you.